بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد الصادق الأمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure today to start like class 22, I think, 22nd or 24th, to be more accurate, because this is week number 12. Today, we are discussing the narrative of Douglas, the slave narrative. And it seems like the presenters are having a very bulging presentation. And I don't want to spoil their presentation, but this class would be like this. I'm going to have general discussion with you about what you have read, your response, okay? And then we'll give the presenters like a chance to present. And perhaps if time is left, we're going to comment. I'm going to comment. Okay? So let's see. Douglas narrative. Yes, what?
For starting, I wrote something for Emily Dickinson and Douglas both in poem.
Really?
Shall I read it?
A poem?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, it's a good starter then. Like, let's see. What's your angle?
I had a funeral when I read that funeral. Drums start to dig my mind. Footsteps scratch my mind. People come more and more until they become a flock of sore. I wish to be dumb, not to feel that numb. But what caused this pain? Is this because of walking under rain? Or my mind gets older and I have to change my brain? My heart is popping up until he dig into my sub. There is no pain, no rain. My eyes are being released and my soul become pleased. And I and mine went there bitterly. She and I were enslaved. They told us that we will be brave. She is the white and I am the black. They say it will never match a track. But with my pencil and wants, mind and songs, went far away where no person on earth did or from his birth smelled that filth. But pencil and her white face still fight in this race. Yet there is no pace in race, because she has the grace, and I and me and the devil lost that race. Pardon me, because I and she, we will never two in one P. Me is the devil, no matter they pretend that they will put an end. She is the white and I am a black. I say we will never walk in a trace.
As usual, it's very creative, you know. I think Hadil is a great project of creativity. She always comes up with new ideas. Anyway, her poem is a good starting point because it seems like Douglas and Emily Dickinson, who were contemporaries, have something in common, which is like both of them were like discriminated against. Both of them were exposed to bad treatment. We saw how Dickinson last time was complaining. She was isolating herself from society because of, and even she never wanted to get married because of, the traditional way of looking at the wife and how women were conceived in general. Today, I think we're discussing a narrative, it's the same perspective. Somebody, or like we are having now, a man who's telling his story, but it's a fictional story. It's an autobiography, however, it is, a literary work, and this is, perhaps one of the important questions that we are going to answer while dealing, while dealing with the narrative of Douglas. It's an autobiography, but still, it is a fictional work of art which has perhaps a plot and, climax, anticlimax, and so on. So let me start by asking you, how did you find, the narrative? Are you done with it, or like you're still at the beginning?
No.
Okay. Are you disturbed?
Yes.
Or yes, what disturbs you? Yes, please.
Well, first time that I encountered a work such work, I read a book before, and just it is the same as Frederick Douglass.
What book did you read?
12 Years a Slave.
Uh-huh.
By Solomon Northup. And it's like it's similar but quite different. It's similar that they both say how they suffer as slaves, how they were forbidden to read. Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave was beaten very, very, very hard when he was captured writing a letter. And when his master knew that he...
So it seems like writing was a crime,
Yeah, it was a crime. And he didn't write, he didn't have a pencil. But he was writing by using grapes, red grapes. Yeah, he used the color to write on the paper.
And this is perhaps why, Mr. Auld got angry with his wife when she taught,
Frederick how to write.
Yeah.
And,
So education is a very important theme in this narrative.
And as Frederick says during his narrative, that writing and reading was a crime because their masters thought that reading will enhance their minds and will let them rebel against their masters and give them the keys and give them the tools to rebel. And this new understanding by reading and writing is like it's a huge weapon.
So it seems like, slavery is not a matter of like superiority and inferiority, but it's a matter of ideology. It is a matter of institution, like the slaveholders were, trying to institutionalize the slavery by following their certain strategies, by denying those people the right to education, because if these people are educated according to Douglass, they're going to rebel. So you need to let them live in the darkness. You need to make them like a way of enlightenment. This will, subjugate them. This will keep them always under, control. This will make them think of themselves as being like inferior, and this will crush them spirit. So, yes, one of the things he's doing is like to expose slavery, to show how slavery was a matter of institution. It was a matter of ideology, and the slaveholders were trying to institutionalize that ideology. Okay, good. Yes, Ahsan.
We studied before about slavery in Huckleberry Finn, but this is a different perspective. This is a more direct image to slavery, and he's giving a lot of cruel images about slavery. So I cannot say, unlike I cannot say that I did not get astonished by the stories narrated in the narrative. So I really was surprised about
You were surprised. What surprised you?
the cruelty of
The slaveholders. But did you feel that all the slaveholders were, or boasted the same treatment? The slaveholders, the masters? Yeah, so you're not done with it. Because, we see that, in the narrative, those who have completed, that not all the slaveholders or even the masters are adopting the same strategy. And perhaps this is one of the major symbols which we are going to discuss later when we dig deep in the analysis itself. It's a symbolic gesture. Yes.
There was one thing that really captured my mind. That's how they used beating as a way to break the slaves mentally and physically. If a slave was like self-conscious, it was like self-independent, or it was like strong, they'll use beating as a way to break.
To crush the spirit,
And
to break the will.
If the master was not capable of doing this, they will send him to someone who was famous of breaking slaves. And again, beating female slaves.
Yeah, that was very appalling,
Yeah,
isn't
it was
it?
like a female could be controlled by many ways other than beating. It's not like the man slave who would be more controlled than a female slave, but beating female slaves
is worse than beating.
Very, very, very brutal. And Douglas, by showing many images from this beating and during his narrative, just to see to say and to say that these masters were very, 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 very brutal in doing so.
Okay. Yes, yes, Taj.
I guess he was very smart. Like we said, not all masters are the same. So he started with the hardest,
The severest.
the extremist image, to put that in our mind that all are the same, all are bad, whether they are like less or more. But I was infuriated by this, and I hate all the masters, whether they were good or bad.
So you don't believe that they are lenient masters, like?
Yes.
Okay.
Seriously, I couldn't complete. I hardly finished chapter 1, and
It's chapter 1, like too little, you know.
I went to sleep.
Okay, so next time you should like read the whole narrative, because you know.
It was like for once this was
Okay.
very
Very heavy. Okay. Yes, Hadil.
For me, is the most interesting literary work we study in this course.
Oh.
I like the way of narrative that we are listening from an experienced man.
Uh-huh.
And his way of narrative was like he was not listening.
So you think this is like an authentic experience?
Yes.
Because you know, critics of Douglas, of his time, accuse him of being unauthentic. You know, this is a personal experience, and he was very subjective. He was not telling the truth. He was using his rhetorical skills to, to mislead people. So you're saying this is very authentic because he's talking about real experience. He has the skill of narrating, exposing, you know, and at the end of the day, it is his own story. You know, we're not talking, it's part of history. It's part of reality. You know, he's talking about himself, but he's talking about himself in a very fictional way.
Yes. Also, his way of narrative, he didn't just describe his events happened with him, but he described events happened and described mission stories happened with other slaves, and to shed light on the cruelty against women.
Okay. The lady there at the back, are you part of, yes? Okay. You're welcome. Yes, Tagreed? You're the presenter. Okay.
So,
Okay. Okay, let's...
His accounting of his narrative is not come from a mere sequencing of events, but he took a role of his action. I think that I read about that there's two narrators standing here within the same character. The first one is
The first person narrator, yeah.
comes going through a series of hardships and misfortunes, and the second one was the free man, the abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who took a position to narrate and to comment on these.
So let's say you have two narrators. One is detached, like an observer, one who is educated, and the other is like the slave himself, who's narrating his experience. Excellent. Yes, Ala?
I noticed that all the Christians and slave masters use the same line, that they enslave people to correct them or to civilize them.
Yeah.
They use the same line.
It's the same pretext, We are civilizing these people. Good. Yes, please. Yes, Ranin?
I think for me the most thing that attracted my attention as a student that he is self-educating.
He is
Self-educating.
self-educated.
Yes, because he started, since education is forbidden for them, he starts to learn by himself. The English alphabet, and by this he became educated and more aware of the set of him.
Yeah, because he realized how education is very important,
To his freedom.
Okay. Good. What else?
I want to talk about the religious point of view in this narrative. Douglas criticized the church and Christian people, how they pretend that they are religious, but in the same time, they
So you want to talk about religion, like how religion...
yes, they the idea of slavery. So how they come to each other, a religious man and he slaves and treat them in a bad way.
So, it's very ironic, like, how you are pious, but at the same time, like, you justify slavery. I think, the theme of religion, is there. There is, like, severe or caustic criticism of religion justifying slavery.
Also, I like the way he tried to achieve equality between him and the white color, even if it was a fictional one. Like we said, that the masters sell their flesh, and the son of the masters wipe their brothers, and also he used the white fellow to refer to the white people.
Yeah, like, this is a good tactic because he was trying to rally support for his for the cause of the slaves, and he thought that it's not a battle between white and black, but it's rather between a rigid mentality, racist mentality, which justifies slavery, and like a humane mentality which thinks that slavery is a crime against humanity. So he was very clever because it's not like a matter of a battle between white and black, but it's a battle between very racist mentality and very liberal mentality which calls for human rights. This is very important angle. Yes, I like. Yes, Nisreen. Zahra.
I felt like it's like a colonizing idea. The
Uh-huh.
colonization aspect was there in the master holders because it's the same strategies that was used that were used by those master holders, like the controlling the minds and hearts of the slaves themselves. Like first of all, they didn't give them where they were born when they were born. So they
Yeah, this is very important. They like, I don't know why would they just like keep away from them such information like about, and even they didn't give them name. So
it's like the same when the colonizers came to a land and like it changed its name in order to change or the identity or the identity.
yes, so as we started, slavery, was an institution.
Yes.
Slavery was an ideology. Like those people, the slaveholders and the slave, the slave ideology was based on certain teachings, certain epistemology, which, it was a plan, something like it has to do with colonizing. So keeping them like where they were born, like because this has to do with what? With identity. And like if you have identity or if you are conscious of identity, then you become rebellious. You want your own rights. And this is like not possible. Okay. I see the same students. What about the rest of the students? Could anybody tell me like where is the turning point in the whole narrative? In what chapter? Like those who have not completed, they cannot answer this question,
The climatic point was when he beats his...
Mr. Covey?
Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Covey, and he considered it as a revival. He raised...
It was like a resurrection, he felt that he was different. Yeah, he was reborn because, and I think here, at this point, he establishes two of the main themes of the narrative, like education, and two of them are liberating powers, education and the physical power. And I think, is it in chapter 6, I think? In chapter 6, this is the turning point. Let me read the whole quotation because it's very important. Like, Covey was very severe, was beating, and in fact, he was almost like 16 years. He was not beaten. This is the first time he was beaten Now, this is what he said. Yes, it is in chapter 10, yes. In chapter 10, I felt like when he knocked him down. What is the page?
As I never felt before,
Yes.
it was glorious resurrection from the
Yeah.
presence of
Which page? Like which page?
240.
Because I have different version. 243. Yes. Look at this quotation. I felt as I never felt before. It was a glorious resurrection from the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom. My long crushed spirit rose from the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom. My long, cowardice departed me. Bold defiance took its place. And now I resolved that, however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed away forever when I could be a slave in fact. So it's a turning point. It's a turning point. I'm not going to be a slave anymore. I might remain a slave in form, but I'm not going to be a slave in form. This is how he discovered, when you discover your power. And I think last year we asked this, it was an exam question. To what extent do you think that this narrative justify, or how would a Palestinian read this, and a Palestinian, of course, would respond by saying, this is, you are defending your right. This is the resistance. Now, when you are like knocking down your, the slaveholder, when you are knocking down, when you are fighting the occupier, this is resistance. It's not terrorism, as sometimes in colonial discourse, they would describe this like, terrorism. So, is it terrorism like to defend your right? Is it terrorism to defend your dignity? Now here he's defending his dignity. Yes?
This turning point reminded me of the preface of Transfam and Rich of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same one that the masters themselves learn or teach them how to rebel, because the more they are oppressed, the more
Yeah.
they will rebel and revolt.
Yeah, because
so
like...
they will speak up, and then the masters will say, oh, they have a voice and they can
But
speak.
if masters had known about this, they would have not like beaten them. And I think, in the narrative, he was implying like this beating or this whipping was little bit, irrational, because sometimes they would beat slaves for very silly, very unjustified things. And even some people, who would... I mean, on the other hand, if some people would commit like gross mistake, they might ignore. So beating was random. So I think yes, if the slave holders and the masters had known that such treatment would lead to rebellion, they would have changed their mind. Okay, I think yes.
A documentary of brutality and cruelty that stimulates you to weep and to sympathize with those slaves.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you read much about slavery itself? Like how slavery, we knew that in the with the early colonists they came. You read about the auction, how people were brought to auction, to the market. And they sold them, so they were bringing like thousands of them in the market. Some of them, like when they are old, they were shaven. A woman with her 5 or 6 kids would, be separated, and you don't see the agony when you see a mother like bidding farewell for her child. And I think there is a song here. I don't know which page. Yeah, chapter 9. This song, breaks the heart. Have you ever tried to meditate this or to sing it? I don't know. I would sing it like this. gone, gone and sold and gone. It would be like this. You know, to the rice swamp, dang and lone, where the slave web ceaseless swings, where the noise some insect sings, where the fever demons strows, poison with the falling dews, those, where the sticky sunbeams glare through the hot and the misty air. Gone, gone, sold and gone. This is how a mother would lament, you know, gone forever. I wouldn't see him. So slavery meant fragmented. Slavery was against family, and I think he was very clever here in juxtaposing, you know, like the slaveholders, like the family, and then the slaves have no family ties. Because, you know, if you have a family, like this means you have identity. And I think in chapter 1, he was not allowed to see his mother quite often. And even when he went to see his mother, it was at night in the darkness, because he didn't. When his mother died, even like, you know, he didn't feel the pain. Why? Because, yeah, like she's like a stranger. He has no emotional ties with his mother, you see. So slavery is heartbreaking, isn't it? I don't want like to talk much. I might talk after your presentation. So you are welcome, Taghreed and who? And Hadil. That's why you are talking, you know. So let's see. You know, I have to quit here. It's good like to step aside and to let, you know, students be the teachers.
Okay, good morning everybody. We are Hadil Tammuz and Taghreed Sharawi. Today we are presenting Douglas. The outline of our presentation: who's Douglas, the purpose of writing his autobiography, background information, style writing, summary themes, and finally American features. To start with, Frederick Douglass is the name Douglass gave to himself after his emancipation, after he gained his freedom. In slavery, he was named as Frederick Austin Washington Bailey. He was famously known as an American abolitionist, editor, author, and statesman and reformer. He was known as the Sage of Anacostia and the Lion of Anacostia. He's an ex-slave, and he spent most of his time after he gained his freedom in lecturing and traveling to raise the awareness about slavery, to abolish slavery, and to defend the human rights, especially the rights of women. He wrote 3 narratives about his life. The first one is our text, a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave written by himself. And the second one, My Bondage and My Freedom. The third one is named Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Background information: our text, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, is the most well-known one of his narratives. Like a lot of critics, it charges him, and they did not believe it was written, such a great piece was written by a slave, because slaves usually were ignorant, they are not educated.
So they thought someone else.
Yes. Yes, we said it is autobiography. The tone of it is angry, emotional. The narrator, it was written by the first-person narrator, and it was clear from the title that his title written by himself. And I think here we have no other choice but to believe him, as he was an experienced man. When he narrates, he was mentioning the real names of the people, and usually when he moved from place to place, he was mentioning the distance even between the places. The conflict is Douglas' struggle to gain his mental and physical freedom as well. He said that if there is no struggle, there is no progress. This is one of his famous quotations. The climax, as we mentioned, the climax of this narrative was when he decided to fight back, when he decided to beat his master. Here, it was not just of physical significance that his master stopped beating him, but also it was a psychological one. Here, he killed both the arrogance of his master, and he killed like the slave inside him, and it was a turning point. Like, then he started to think about his freedom and his ability to do it. The purpose of writing his autobiography: He wrote his autobiography for two purposes. The first one, to prove himself, to prove his identity, that he is an educated man, he can express himself and talk about his life. He said that, one of his important quotations, "You have seen how a man was made a slave. You will now see how a slave was made a man." And the second reason or purpose was to raise the awareness of the slavery, to move the emotions of the people in order to abolish slavery later. About his style, Douglas conveyed his ideas. He used a precise, a clear, a direct words. He did not want to use long complex sentences because he wanted people to understand, to get his point easily. He combined several modes of expression: descriptive, like he was describing the events happened with him in his life; narrative, like when he narrated between his description, he was narrating a lot of stories regarding himself and regarding other slaves as well; exposition, like giving background, like whenever he introduced a new master, he gave us background about himself; persuasion, like when he was describing his feeling and to appeal to us as readers to understand the bad condition of slavery and to stand against it. The summary, the chapter 1 mainly has 2 points. The first one is he talked about himself as he was born of a black woman, of a black slave woman. Mainly he didn't know his father, but usually he is a white man, and maybe he was his master, he didn't know. Also, he mentioned that he was separated.
If you were, this is the greatest irony.
Yeah. He was separated from early age from his mother, mainly about 12 months. 12 months he was separated of his mother in an attempt to cut any other bond with other people. His master wanted him just to have to belong just to his masters and have no other bond with other people.
Excuse me, coming back to the slave being the son of a white man means like there was a crime, there was a rape incident.
Yes.
This group or category of slaves were called the mulatto. The mulattoes were the worst treated. You know why? Why do you think? And they were, better. I mean, slaves were better than them.
It's like two sins together.
Huh?
It's like two sins together. He's a prostitute and he's a slave. So the treatment
who would treat them?
the mistress.
The mistress.
Yes.
The mistress, because she would think that her husband betrayed her. And this is the fruit of the betrayal. So he would be treated, worse. Like the mulattoes would be treated worse, like the slaves themselves. Okay.
The second point in this chapter, when he mentioned the brutal beating of his aunt, he was a witness. The most important quotation: slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of their life.
What was wrong with his aunt? Why was she beaten?
She did not obey her master's orders. He allowed her not to go out, and she went, and he found her in a company with another man.
Yeah, like she was beautiful.
Yes.
So her crime, she was beautiful, and I think this is very clever because slavery is linked with ugliness, devil. Here, he was very clever, saying, okay, we have beauty. We have beautiful. Why do you stigmatize black people by being not beautiful? This is very clever of them. It's another gesture. Yes, beauty there. In blackness, there's beauty.
Yes. Slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of their because they are ignorant, they don't have identity, they are like the animals, like horses. The second quotation: the whitest children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. They didn't want just to control him physically by long hour labors, but they also wanted to control his mind by didn't think of his identity. I do not recollect ever seeing my mother by light day. Very little communication ever took place between us, and because of that, it led us to a second quotation: I received the tidings of her death with much of the same emotion I should have probably felt at the death of Estrella. So yes, they succeeded in cutting the bond with his family. About the beating of his aunt, the louder she screamed, the harder he wiped. He is so cruel, his master. I expect it would be my turn. That here it foreshadows his beating in the future. About the second chapter, like here, Douglas mentioned the lack of food, lack of dress, and lack of bed, even lack of hours to sleep are given to the slaves. Also, he described the privilege for the slaves, the privilege of the house of colonel. Also,
what do you think they, deprive them from all these things?
They are not human.
to keep them in
They're
need.
not human. Huh? To break the respect.
Yes.
And like, if they, let's say, they give them all means of comfort, like, imagine that Israel would give all the prisoners like all the means of comfort. So these people will not, think, they will think of something else. So I mean,
It is the same of the occupier policy here. They prevent us of many necessities of life until because they want just to deprive us of thinking of other things.
To focus on getting such things, not to getting the
just to keep thinking about this, to narrow the mind, to make us get obsessed, thinking about these things.
Yes.
And I think, the strategy, there's a strategy about food, and in the narrative there are two strategies in fact. One, either to give them like ample food, to give them much food.
This is in
and here
country,
they would be
Baltimore.
sick. Huh?
Yeah.
Would be sick. The second is like to deprive them, and again, like you are crushing their, both of them are leading to the same result. Like at the end, their spirit is crushed. Okay.
Yes, the third point in this chapter, like he mentioned the songs slaves were singing during their working. Here, he, unlike the white people think it comes out of their happiness, but it comes out of their suffering, of their agony, and they sing it to relieve their hearts. The quotations, children from 7 to 10 years old of both sexes almost naked night be seen at all season of the year. At all season of the year, they are naked, so it refers to the lack of clothes. It was considered in their mind with greatness a representative could not be prouder of his election seat in the American Congress than a slave on one the out farms would be of his election to be to a rand at the great house farm. Here is an irony, like he should light here on in this quotation on the ignorance of the slaves, and because they are ignorant, they did not understand that slavery everywhere is bad. Slavery everywhere has the same result, the same impact. They prefer to go to the colonial garden.
But his irony is very significant because his irony or this juxtaposition shows like, yes, you're talking about freedom. You're talking about, a state or like a country which is governed by, like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and see here, like those people who mistakenly think that they are representative of their states. What kind of states? What kind of freedom you have in this country?
Yes. Here, I like this quotation so much. About the songs, I have sometimes thought that the mere hearing of these songs would do more to impress some minds with the horrible character of slavery than the reading of the whole volumes of philosophy. Also, the songs of the slaves represent the sorrow of their heart, and he is relieved by them. About the third chapter was a description to the life of the colonial garden. He said that scarcely a day passed during the summer, but that some slaves had to take the lash for stealing fruits. The slaves became as fearful of tar as of the lash. Here is also irony because slaves could not enjoy their the fruits of their labor.
Yes,
they were.
It's like one of the symbols of the narrative. So you have a garden, and this garden, is protected by putting tars.
Yes.
So if you want to know who's, like, any slave put up with tar
Try to enter.
would be beaten.
Yes.
But the symbol is like this garden, which in Lloyd's plantation, it has all types of fruit. So it's like a garden of Eden, you know? And the slaves are like what? The snake, like Satan. They are not allowed, you know,
Even
they
to
should
come
be banned
near.
from this,
Yes.
you know? So this is the diabolic perception of slaves. The slaves were perceived like devil. They should not be allowed to go to that. Because if they would go to that, they would spoil, they would corrupt, they would seduce, you know, the people there. So they should be kept away from that. You know, this is one of the symbols, because when we talk about the fictional element, we have to talk about symbolism.
Yes, they never know when they were saved from punishment. Everything depends upon the looks of the horses. Here we see that their master loved his horses more than his slaves. Like here they are treated not like animals, but less than the animals. The slaveholders have been known to send in spies among their slaves to ascertain their views and feeling in regard to their condition. Here, like the Christian people here, it's treated them and teach them how to be hypocrites, how to lie, because they are supposed to praise their masters instead of all their agony and of all their suffering.
So they have to learn how to flatter.
Yeah.
And if they are not good at flattery, you know, they would be punished. The iron is telling the truth, you know, leads to punishment. But telling a lie, flattery, leads to the reward. Like, look here, it's very ironic. All of these things like achieved in the narrative. So it's a part of, it's a masterpiece. You know? And this challenges like you are telling your story, but you are fictionalizing it.
Many under the influence of prejudice think their own masters are better than the masters of the other slaves. It is not uncommon for slaves even to fall out and quarrel among themselves about about the relative goodness of their masters.
And they would, you know, fight because, you know, they think that their masters are better.
Yes, this is because of their ignorance.
Yeah, of course.
Chapter 4 mainly, Douglas mentioned two stories, one of male and the other of female slaves, in which they are killing of cold blood. The masters kill them for trivial things, and nor the society nor the law questioned them. It was setting a dangerous example to the other. Like they killed them in order to stop the other from thinking of disobeying their masters, to make them an example to the other slaves. Killing a slave or any colored person is not treated as a crime.
I can, like Dembi is the one who was killed here.
Yeah, Dimbi and another woman, yeah.
Yeah, but like why was he killed?
I don't know, his master asked him, he will count 3 times and he is supposed to get out of his place, but he didn't obey. And the other woman, slave woman, was killed. The other woman, yes, was killed because she was slowly moved to go for the crying child.
And they were not punished by the law?
No, nor the society.
So
it was acceptable because they are not humans.
They were acquitted, you know?
Yes.
So it means like there was a problem with the law itself. Yes. So he's questioning the legal responsibility here, like law was biased.
Yes. Chapter 5 here represent Douglas movement to Baltimore. Like here, I thought I look upon my departure from Colonel Plantation as one of the most interesting events of my life. This chapter shed light on the difference between the country and the city and the town. As in the country, in Baltimore, there are standards that prevent the masters from starving their slaves and from beating them severely. But also there was some exceptions.
You know, the plantation life is different from like the life in the city. You know, at least slavery is not as grave as it is in, you know, the plantation. So the life of plantation is a help.
Now Douglas is in Baltimore. His master is Mr. Olds, and we are exposed to his wife, Mrs. Sophia, who tries to give a try in order to teach Douglas reading and writing. She deals with him as a genuine human being. She wants to make him aware. But she is her action is harshly disapproved by her husband when he see that he says, if you give a nigger an inch, he will take an ell. A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do what he is told to do. He wants him to blindly obey them without even thinking. In chapter 7, Douglas learns a new lesson about slavery. The effect of slavery is not merely has all its effect on the slaves, but also in their masters. We say slaves soon proved its ability to divert her of these heavenly qualities. Mrs. Sophia, she turns of being a kind and a kind person to a brutal one. At the age of 12, he read a book called entitled The Colombian Orator. It is a philosophical conversation between a slave and his master. The slave is trying to convince his master and in order to emancipate him, and he gives a powerful piece of rhetoric. In this book, Douglas is exposed to the term of abolitionist. As I read under it, I would at times feel that that learning to learn had been a curse rather than being a blessing.
Yeah, this is very ironic. Why?
The more he reads, the more it hurts himself of the reality that he is a slave.
Yeah, like when you read and write, it means like you know more. This is one thing. Again, when you read and write, you become very sensitive. You see what I mean? When you are educated, you become sensitive. So, like, it's very ridiculous. Like, he wished he had not learned how to read and write. You know, because he started to see how slavery was a crime. He started to see how slavery was a crime against the humanity in general. So that's the greatest irony. Yeah, go ahead.
After that, his master was died, leaving him. We know that slaves are properties within their master's hands, and when he was died, he was ranked or lined with in a position equally to animals to be sold.
This tribute thing, you know, you take these slaves and you know. Like to match this, like you take, you know, like 3 lions or whatever, 3, you know, swine, and you know.
Yes.
So they were equated with animals.
We are all ranked with the horses, sheep, and swine. There were horses and men, cattle and women. We see that both two words are a human being and an animal, putting equally within the same context. Pigs and children, all holding the same rank in the scale of being, and we're all subjected to the same narrow examination. Both are equally presented. In chapter 9, he moved to Thomas Plantation. In chapter 9, there's a critique of the practices of the Christian people, harsh criticism of the practices of them. The quotation, I have seen tie up a lamb young woman and whip her with a heavily. The master whipped his slave, a female woman, bitterly, and he quoted an evidence or a proof from the scripture. Like he, in the last bit, he that know his master's will and doth it not shall be beaten with many stripes. Who will not obey his master will be beaten bitterly.
And this is the white loaf of bread. You remember unleavened bread? The white loaf of bread, like how
yes.
Slavery was entrenched in scripture.
In chapter 10, we are exposed to the climatic point here when he beats his covey, his master, and it is considered an act of counterattack, an act of fighting back. I felt as I never felt before. It was a glorious resurrection from the tomb of slavery to the heaven to freedom. He felt that as if he raised from death. He's
Look at the metaphors here. The tomb of slavery. Slavery is compared to a tomb. This is a metaphor. And like freedom is compared to heaven. You know? How lovely the rhetoric is. How rich this narrative full of like tropes. These tropes, it is full of ironies, metaphors, symbolism. So whenever you are asked, is it fictional? You should prepare yourself for such an answer.
Here he is formally, in a legal sense, he's still a slave. But as long as he fight back, he consider him conceptually or a free man. Then he gone to another master who is free land, and now he give us another version of those masters. He's a kind person, not as his previous ones, Covey and Olds. And this indicates that Douglas is not attacking religion itself, but he attacks the practices of it.
Yeah, but somebody might ask, what is the value of like naming the slave
free
owners
land
or the slave masters like this? Covey, Severe, what else?
free land also it has connotations.
All these like, are to frighten them, When you say, oh, Mr. Severe is going to be a master, my God, your heart starts to beat. You become very afraid. And usually, like, this is a cultural issue. Like, some people might name their kids, like, Sakhir, Hamdar, like, to frighten people. Yeah, like, this is to keep away, jealousy, or envy.
There's an incident in the companion's life when they asked about why they named their sons with like ugly names. They said to frighten the enemy.
You frighten the enemy,
And
yeah.
this is the same.
Okay, good.
In chapter 11, it is also a point of enlightenment. Like he gave an attempt to teach his fellow slaves, and then he plot a plan in order to escape from his masters, but he's tricked and returned back to his master. He went to New York, where he was becomes a free man, and he changes his name from Paley to Douglas in order not to be caught. They moved north in Massachusetts, he and his wife, and he's actively engaged in an abolitionist movement as a writer and as a orator. So at this point we can see that Douglas is given a passport to freedom. The theme of identity is prominently shown here. Throughout the narrative, his masters tries to strip him from his own identity in order not to make him take role of his actions. He says, the white children could not tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. Knowing one's...
White children could tell their age.
Could. Yes, could
Yeah,
tell.
I could tell their age, but like, I don't know
I
why
could
he
not.
couldn't.
So he considered having a birthday and having a location in history and time is a privilege that he's deprived from. Throughout writing, one's identity is affirmed. We are exposed to the act of writing as a means of assertion. And Douglas is transformed in a free man. I mentioned that point, that there is no two narrating, and this adds to the credibility of his narrative. The one who is a slave, we found it in the title, an American slave in the title, and the free man and writer in the last bit of the title, written by himself like assertion of his identity. Ignorance as a tool of slavery and the power of education. his masters and slaveholders tries in order to keep
These are
him.
the major themes, you know, like,
If you teach that nigger how, his master, Mr. Old, saying to his wife, if you teach that nigger how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. Once he become educated, he will not be a slave anymore.
So ignorance was associated with slavery. Ignorance was something deliberate, you know.
This quote is given by Douglas, not in the narrative. The mere act of writing was the ultimate act of self-affirmation, the ultimate denial of enslavement. It shows the powerful of the act of writing. When he gone through the Colombian orator, the book that the reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts, to meet the arguments brought forward and sustain slavery. But while they relieved me in one difficulty, they brought me another even more painful than the one which I was relieved. The more he discovered that he is a slave, the more it's painful to him. And the slavery, we are exposed to the hardships, the whipping of the slaves. The female slave who is whipped bitterly, and he says he was severely whipped by the chief gardener. You have seen how a man was made a slave, and you shall see how a slave was made a man. Being a slave means being unhuman. And a cheerful eye under the influence of slavery soon become red and rage. Those lines are directed to his mistress, who transformed from being a kind person who considered him as a genuine human being to an outrageous one who wants the complete. The hypocrisy, he criticizes the practices of those hypocrite Christians. This line, the hypocrites Christian Thomas and Covey, they beat slaves while reciting scriptural verses. See what contradictory it is.
People were like having Bibles, and they were like having slaves.
But he was not. He was an objective in his description, because there was a preacher who tries to convince the slave owners in order to emancipate their own slaves. So there are good Christian and bad Christian. So Douglas is not attacking religion, but religious hypocrisy. This is our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have finished the book. And I think you have left nothing for us to say. We have a lot of things to say, and I think you should read, because not all of you have read. This is what I discovered today. You should read, because when you read, we discuss, and like your analysis becomes deeper. So I think next time you should read more, and we're going to discuss. Perhaps I'll be taking the first part of the lecture, commenting further on certain quotations, and then, like, if you want, like, I'm not sure, like, they are going to continue their presentation. They are done. So let's have general discussion. Like, you have to read and to see, which quotation should we dwell upon. Thank you very much for coming and for being prepared.